My name is Frankie Miranda. I am the president of the Hispanic Federation, and I welcome you to this very, very important panel. Before we start, I want to make sure that everybody knows that we are right now live streaming this event, and we're going to have a few people joining us and watching via the live stream. I want to extend my warm welcome to all of you today here as we gather to explore a critical topic in our community, Afro-Latinidad. Thank you for being here to engage in this important conversation. And as you well know, Afro-Latinidad embodies a rich tapestry of cultures, histories, identities, woven into together by shared experiences, resilience, struggle, and triumph. Today we stand on the shoulders of generations who have fought against racism, colonialism, and marginalization. Understanding this shared history is essential to sharing our collective future. The struggles faced by Afro-Latinos and African Americans are often interconnected, deeply rooted in systemic inequalities that affect both communities. Today, we're in for a real treat as we join by some of our nation's leading academics, policymakers, and civil rights activists who will lead a two-part panel conversation around the shared history and the destiny of Afro-Latines and African Americans, Black Americans. They offer us a roadmap for a shared national Latino Black advocacy agenda. We hope that our panel, Shared History, Shared Agenda, serves as a vital platform to highlight our intersectionality and to recognize that our fight for social justice, equality, and empowerment must be united. I invite each of you to actively engage in the conversation today. Consider how you can contribute to a shared agenda, whether through advocacy, education, or community engagement. Our success depends on our collective effort and unwavering commitment by one another. By standing together, we can assert our narratives, celebrate our identities, and shape the future direction of this country. And now is an enormous pleasure for me to introduce someone that has many, many different roles. She's the president of the Creative Justice Initiative, founder of the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute, co-founder of Corredor Afro Project, and of course, the vision behind this project and the many conversations happening around the country around Latinidad, a true leader, a true visionary. Please welcome Dr. Marta Moreno Vega.
Thank you for being here. This panel is part of a series, as Frank said, that is happening across the country, focused on Afro-Latinos and focused on the fact that as African descendants, we're Black, right? And for many, because of the construct of colonization, we've been framed in a way that we are different from other Africans. We are one. We came from the same place, distributed throughout the world, and now we're together again. So that shared history has been continuous. Those conversations have been continuous, and our panel will address that. But let us be clear that Latinidad often erases the Native and African traditions and peoples that we are. And in that three-race kind of structure, the African descendant history gets erased. We will not be erased. The largest population of Africans were torn out of West Africa into what is now the Americas. So we understand we're Black, and we hope that you share with us in this discussion understanding that going forward, we've always had a joint agenda, We have it now with intentional purpose to save our liberty and save democracy.
That's right.
Yeah, bien dicho.
She didn't introduce you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Mattei. I am the president of the board of the Creative Justice Initiative. I want to thank Marta Vega. I want to thank Frankie and the Hispanic Federation for partnering with us on this, and all of the partners and many people who have contributed to us being here today. It's a great honor to be here. I want to also thank the panelists who are here, our esteemed panelists, and introduce them. To my left, I have Dr. George Chinea, who is professor and director of the Center of Latino and Latin American Studies at Wayne State University in Detroit. To his left, I have Esmeralda Simmons. She's an attorney and founder and longtime director of the Center for Law and Social Policy at Medgar Evers College at the City University of New York. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Yasmyn Irizarry. She is Associate Professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. So please, welcome them all. And I just want to thank you for being a part of this important conversation. And I just kind of wanted to start with an overview and a foundation of, and this seems like a simple question, but it's a loaded question. And I'm gonna toss it to Jorge, but also, you all can chime in as needed. But how do you define Afro-Latino, and why is that definition absolutamente negro?
Well, in basic terms, right, we could say that Afro-Latino is really a term used to identify, validate, recognize, legitimate the presence of Africans and blacks in the culture and these societies of Latin America and in the Hispanic world within the United States, the Hispanic Latino world. When I think about Afro-Latinidad, I think about a couple of different things, but let me preface it by mentioning something that happened in my youth, my growing up. I asked my mother a long time ago, tell me a little bit about her father. And she said that my father, Máximo Serrano, he enjoyed dancing in different communities when he was young and while he was raising her. And I said, what kind of dances did Máximo do? She said, well, they would go to the houses, they would get into the second floor, they had a wooden floor, they would start hitting the floor with their feet, con los zapatos. She said it was thunderous, it was loud. I always thought that at any one moment, the floor was gonna give in and people were gonna fall right through the floor and end up in the floor. I said, Mom, what do they call that dance? I never heard of it. I mean, I heard bomba y plena, aguinaldo, salsa, merengue, bachata. Where is this thing? She said it was called garabato. Oh. So I studied garabato a little bit, trying to find out what it meant. And it really was a part of the influence of the flamenco music in Spain. Then when you go back to the flamenco music in Spain, you learn that the flamenco music in Spain came from two different sources, primarily from India, right, and from Northern Africa.
Morocco.
And so you have this influence in the culture that predates the development of Afro-Latinidad in the Americas, right? So Afro-Latinidad really began in two places. In Spain, for the portion that pertains to us here as people who came from Latin America that were colonized by Spain and Portugal, but also in Africa, because the Portuguese and the Spaniards began colonizing those areas. The Portuguese in particular, they brought in Roman Catholicism to places like Angola, the Congo, and Mozambique. And the people who came from those areas were already infused with some of the ideas of that religion, and they blended in with native forms of religion in Africa. And so Afro-Latinidad has a very long legacy, a long, path, and it behooves us to understand that path and to embrace it. And so that's what I have been doing as a professor, also as an individual interested in, curious about Afro-Latinidad. Spain was under the Islamic influence for 800 years. And a lot of
Moors.
yes, the Moor, and a lot of the culture that they brought in the architecture, the arts, and the sciences, but they also brought in languages, food that we eat, clothing, and terminology that we use. When I think about Puerto Rico and people say, you know, el alcalde va a hablar, the mayor is going to be talking, alcaide really is a term from the Arabic. It's called alcaide. The same thing with alguacil, which is like a sheriff or local police enforcement person. Alguacil is another Arabic term. So we have tons of words that come from the Arabic and nuances in those words that remind us of the influence of Northern Africa in the culture of Spain. And then we had the influence that occurred, and this is the one that we're most familiar with, which is slave trade. The slave trade brought in 12...
Before you go there, please mention the fact that those Arabic, Islamic people were Africans.
Absolutely.
From not just Northern Africa, but from Northwest Africa as well, all the way down to the Sudan.
Absolutely.
So it was not just Islamic people going to conquer Europe. It was Africans with Hannibal going to conquer Europe.
And so you have, thank you for adding that, that's beautiful. And so you have then the influx of about 12.5 million people that came to the Americas involuntarily, right? They were essentially dehumanized and sold off as piezas de Indias or pieces of the Indies. And Africans had to come to terms with that reality. And part of the way they did this was to undergo cleansing rituals in the Americas to try to remove the curse of enslavement. And from those ceremonies that were being taking place, we had candomblé, we got santeria, and we have a lot of other African-derived religious beliefs that emerged and thrived in the Americas. And you can even say the spirituals in the South were part of that. And so what you have then is that the New World became Africanized. You know, by about the middle of the 19th century, the Americas was an extension of Africa, immigration-wise, rather than an extension of Europe. And a lot of us keep referring to Europe as the motherland. We should be looking at the other way. The motherland is in the other direction, on the other side of the Atlantic. And so when you look at the influence of that in the United States, it was rather minimal. We have a slide on that, if someone could perhaps show that, the slide of the African slave trade.
Number 3.
Is it number 3?
Do we have it on?
It's number 3.
Is there? Yes. And you can see there that essentially, by the way, when I say 12.5 million people, those are the people that landed in the Americas. The people that were taken, you had to add a percentage of about 30% to that. So that now we're talking close to 20, 25 million. But those who arrived mostly in South America and the Caribbean. The United States received, on the next slide, if you had that, only about 3% of the enslaved Africans who came to the Americas. But the United States also received additional Africans through regional channels. That is, people that were being procured in the West Indies, in Cuba, Jamaica, Barbados, and so on, and then sent to the norte, no? To the north. In addition, when the United States expanded in the course of the 19th century, they integrated Louisiana they integrated the so-called Mexican section, which is really half of Mexico's territory. They integrated Florida. And in those areas, there was plenty of people of black ancestry that were integrated into the culture of the United States. And that's where we have a lot of that Latin jazz, right? That came into the picture. So the influence of Afro-Latinidad is extensive, is wide-ranging, is profound, and we need to look at that. And with that, I close so that I can give somebody else a chance to add more to that.
Thank you, Jorge. Does anybody want to add to this idea of defining Afro-Latinidad and how it is absolutamente negro?
If I could just add to this, I think that absolutamente negro is an important part of this because with a history, and we can talk a little bit about that, I think, in a bit of mestizaje, and narratives of mixedness that exist in Latin America have been carried through generations of immigrants to the United States. We have stories of ancestry, but that's different than actually speaking of an experience of blackness and of black people. And so Afro-Latinidad and tying it to this absolutamente negro is speaking to not just a story of a history of pictures 500 years ago and an imaginary of people who traveled and a story of a great-grandmother. It's an experience of blackness in the present. It's an ongoing experience of blackness. And it's an ongoing experience of blackness in lived experience, in oppression, in migration, in family, in joy, in all these things. And so that's an important part because we are so, I think, moving so much into a moment of identity that we forget that in that is part of a story, but that is not a whole story. And here, the tying feature is both the history and an ongoing experience and connection that's tied to being absolutamente negra.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask Esmeralda. This panel is called Shared Histories, Shared Agendas. Can you talk a little bit about that shared history and experiences that Yasmyn was alluding to and talk a little bit more about those experiences and histories that connect Afro-descendant communities in the U.S. and in the Americas?
Well, I'm going to just pick up from where Jorge left off.
Okay.
Because he covered very, very much of the original part of it, so I don't need to repeat that. But understand that this Latin movement, this black movement, this Afro-American movement, that's mythical. There was one movement for freedom. We were all either enslaved or under the foot, or the heel of the colonizers and some of them masters. So we were working together whenever we were. We did not see a distinction. Understand that this distinction, again, is a tool of divide and conquer. Language is, no disrespect, but English is not my people's language. Portuguese is not anybody's from Africa's original language. Neither is Spanish. No disrespect, because obviously we have the right to speak whatever languages that ties us together. But let's not pretend that that's how we started out as a people. So all of that is to say is that we were working together. Now, some examples. We don't have to go, we can, but we don't have to go all the way back to the United States, the colonies, but let's at least realize that even as far back as the colonial wars, 1812, the War of 1812, and I hope you remember what that's about, because we were fighting with our Latin brothers and sisters, with the British, some with the Spanish, some with the French, to make sure that the United States, which was then a country, a self-declared country, I hope I say that right, self-declared nation, And if you didn't get that, that means that we can once again declare what this nation is. And if you don't understand that this struggle we were raging was because we were the majority population in this country. By 1850, we were the majority people here. Not in control, but it was us. So every time there was a revolt, we were in those revolts together. There were Latins in the Maroons. There were Latins fleeing with Harriet Tubman. There were all of the black people were fleeing together. And if somebody happened to worship Islam, if somebody happened to speak Spanish, or whatever they could remember of it, they were not precluded. All were welcome to escape. And we helped each other. But, I said I was going to mention his name, and I will. Let us not forget that we fast forward to the 1960s, the Civil Rights Movement. I'm not passing over everything that happened. Forgive me for not going into Arturo Schomburg. Remember, these are people that caused us to be who we are. I would not be the student of John Henry Clark were it not for Arturo Schomburg. He studied with him. It passed down to me. But who was marching in the front line of the Civil Rights March? Cesar Chavez. Oh, how surprising. Why is he there? Because it's one movement. And I'm just going to go by my personal history. There's a reason I'm on this panel. And there are some New Yorkers here. There are some New Yorkers here, and I don't have to tell them about what I have been accused of and guilty of and very, very proud of. But, yes, I was one of those students of the black and Puerto Rican students that took over Hunter College and then created the Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department.
I think it's appropriate that I should mention that my sister was one of the first students in that program.
Oh, what's her name? What's her name?
Nilda Chinea.
Yes?
Yeah.
No. See, that's when you always got to do good because you never know who you're running into. I knew Nilda. I was one of the first majors too. You don't start a department and not majoring. Anyway, a few years later, some pesky Puerto Ricans decided that we need to do more than have the Schomburg Library. We need to have a study center. And I was a student leader sitting on the P&B committee. I don't want to get into all this nonsense. But all you need to know is we were the ones that decided, yes, let's put in for creating a center for Puerto Rican studies. So this lonely student, I should say lowly student, and all of these big-time faculty members petitioned the school, and the school said no, and then I said, don't worry about it. The students then petitioned the school, and after they got beat up from the strike, they were, okay, fine. You want a center? No problem. It just has to raise its own money. That was easy to raise the money because by then there were Puerto Rican legislators, there were Puerto Rican people in Congress, and the money was raised. And I'm not putting aside any other people that have been so generous to the Centro. And Centro is the largest collection of Puerto Rican artifacts, studies, papers, and people are still going to that lowly room in the Hunter College building to study at El Centro. And that's something to be proud of. But that's one thing. Going on. In law school, I went to law school at Brooklyn Law School. There was no Latino student union. So of course, the Black student union welcomed all the Latinos in. Hey, you're with us. And it was, and they said, well, some of them didn't identify as Black. I said, it's all right. Come on in. We have to take care of each other. We are one people. We have to take care of each other. And later on, there was it was called Latino Law Students Association. and the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund had a lot to do with helping that come to bear. But just to want you to know that we have been together forever. The division is manufactured. Manufactured. Moving along, and this personal history. From 1979 to 1983, myself, Juan Cartagena, I praise his name. We were co-counsel on at least half a dozen major, I'm talking about Supreme Court civil rights cases on voting rights. And I was what? 2 years out of law school. He was 3 years out of law school. We were taking cases to the Supreme Court and beating the pants off of the city government and the state government because they were not doing right by us in terms of voting rights. And we were using Section 5 and Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to make sure that we had equal protection and fair districts. I hope you heard the word fair. That means one group does not take advantage of another. I'm also happy to say I work with Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, which was at Puerto Rico Legal Defense Fund. I work with Angelo Falcone Institute, again, praise his name, Institute for Latino Policy, and I'm leaving out dozens of other folks that I work with from the Institute as well as the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, now Latino Justice, over the years. Yeah. And then we did something unprecedented that made national news. We created a group of voting rights attorneys of color that represented our constituent populations in New York State. And we put together a unity map with Asians so that they could not divide and conquer us and one group is getting more than they deserve. We put together a fair map. You know how hard that was? And how many of our own people said, no, no, no. I want this area, you're giving it to them, but fair is fair. So I'm gonna stop there. I have some more to talk about in terms of what we have done together. When you're willing to show, my husband said I should say these 2 words, and I'm sincere in saying them. Respect and earned trust. Earned trust. I am proud to sit on the board of the Creative Justice Institute. I'm proud to sit on Elizabeth Jean-Pierre's board in terms of doing climate justice and uprose. These are Latinas whom I love and adore as sisters and as amazing visionaries. If you don't know about them, please know that you have giants moving amongst you. Honor them, respect them. For me, I'm just their sister.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I could just add a little bit about this shared history, it's really important to think about the fact that when we're saying shared history, we're not saying shared and separate. It is actually shared. There are, I believe one of the Tuskegee Airmen was Afro-Latino.
Yes.
Even thinking about international conversations during the late 1800s in the fight against eugenics, the conversation was international. One of the first people to respond was Antonio Fermin, who was an anthropologist from Haiti. In conversation later with who? Du Bois. Right? So even Black political thought and its development in the US was not just a national conversation, but an international one that included voices from Latin America and from Black people who were also battling anti-Blackness, battling coloniality, battling white supremacy, and in conversation and collectively working towards those goals. And so it's important to think about, in thinking about this shared history, understanding that that shared history isn't just a separate, but actually a collective one. Having left New Jersey, where a lot of my early understandings of that were in New York, New Jersey, and then having since lived in Ohio and Indiana, Mississippi, now in Texas, where I have people talking about the experiences of Black civil rights in Texas and Afro-Latinos in Texas, what it means to be, I have a postdoctoral fellow who is Afro-Panamanian in San Antonio. Whoa. Right? These are different kinds of experiences, and speaking about what it means to think about that history. Also, history of migration. For example, there are communities on the coast in Mexico who celebrate Juneteenth. Why?
That's right.
Because the railroad wasn't just north, it was also south. And our migration was not just into the US, but also out. There's a community in the Dominican Republic, in the northern part, in Samaná. There was actually a community taken there by their pastor of the AME church that was in Philadelphia seeking freedom in the 1800s. We have a student in Black Studies at Texas who was helping them trying to archive their original documents from the 1800s. Because they are descendants of people enslaved in the United States who now have their own accent community and still sing their hymns at their AME church in English. Even though all their children speak Spanish. It was a very interesting New York Times article about this several years ago. So these shared histories, it's an ongoing history, and a shared history that is national, international, in, out, and ongoing even now, and national across the country, California, Texas, Chicago, New York. And there are different ways that is manifested, but all of them include a long history of Afro-Latinx people, Black people being part of and actively engaging in movements towards liberation.
Right.
Wonderful, thank you. Wow, so I want to follow up on what you were talking about, but I just want to, in the spirit of sharing personal connections, you were talking about Brooklyn Law School, so I just want to say that's my alma mater, and I was a member of both the Black and the Latino Student Union, so thank you, Esmeralda.
The tradition continues.
That's right. So we were talking about all these shared histories, shared connections, shared experiences, shared culture, all this sharing. So in light of that, why is a panel like this important? Why is this conversation important? What are some of the historical or structural factors that necessitate this conversation?
I'm hot to talk about it.
Okay, please do.
First, understand that there is a fictitious thing called the census, and even the census agrees that of the total U.S. population of 345 million people, they claim the Latino population is 19.4%, and of that 12% are Afro-Latin. So you know that that's really skewed, and we're going to have to deal with that. How they force people to choose and decide and deny. Of that population, of the U.S. population, they have Afro-Caribbean, that's only new for the last 10 years, for the last 4 years, and I love this, I'm one of them, only 0.8%. That's ludicrous. African-American as 12.6%. And they've separated those two out. And they've also separated African, continental African out as well. So they're going to continue to separate in order to separate us. And the reason why we're here is because we have a shared agenda. The folks who want us to be under the heel again, or simply want to be on top, they don't care who's under them, are very alarmed that in less than 12 years, they will have to admit that we are the majority population of the United States. All of this brouhaha is about the fact that if democracy is a democracy and we are the majority, we should rule. They don't want that. So therefore, they have to have all kind of mechanisms to eliminate that possibility of a shared agenda of people of color, majority Latin, followed by African Americans, followed by Asians, followed by browns, now called Middle Easterns. that will be the majority population. Some of those folks may want to align with white folks. That's fine. They can go with whoever they want to. But the rest of us are designed at this point to continue to be suppressed to the least. Therefore, all kinds of voting mechanisms are going to have to be changed so we can't vote. You know, everything has to be shut down. They will challenge you. They will challenge whether you're a citizen. They will challenge whether or not you have a chance to vote. They will challenge immigration, opening up immigration and legalizing folks that have been here for decades. They will challenge everything. They will not let people of color in the country while they welcome Europeans, because they do not want that shift to occur. And they are presuming, and this should make us quake, that we are organizing together. Let's make that a reality.
Yes, that's it. So I'm very glad that you brought up these numbers, because in preparation for this, I did a little homework, did a little research, tried to get my finger on what these numbers are, and it was not easy.
Oh, I asked an expert.
Yes, yes. No. So the census, the last U.S. Census 2020, counts the people who said both Black and Latino at 3.9 million. The last Pew Research Center report estimates that that number is actually of Latino, of Afro-Latino, Latinx peoples to be 6 million. And every subsequent study that I looked at was a different, wildly different number. And so we have the fortune of having Yasmyn on this panel who does so much work in this area. And I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about why it's so difficult to get a handle on the numbers, and also why aggregation, or more importantly, disaggregation of those numbers is important to the conversation.
Well, I guess to start, part of the reason it's hard to get to those numbers is because we have created a system that has positioned Latinx, Latino, Latine, Latinidad as a racial category, as a collective that I guess in some ways is perceived as homogenous. I mean, I think about the history of like looking at Univision and telenovelas, and everybody looks the same except nobody looks like me, right, or any of my family, and then juxtaposition that, right? And so when you are trying to measure a group, it's hard to measure them when we say you are two of, because you can't split people in half, right? How are you that and that? They go, how are you that and that? Is it that your mother is this and your father is this? Is it that this is this? Like, you can cut somebody. Because the history and the coloniality has also tried to erase Blackness from Latinidad, and in doing that, erase Black people from Latinos. And what that has done is made it so that it's difficult to actually measure that. It's made it difficult to measure it. And what that does is that leads to erasure. Because you are supposed to be one or the other. You can't be both. How can you be Black and Latino? How is that possible? If Latino is who I see in the telenovela, and if Black is not Latino, how can you be both? How can you speak Spanish and be Black? Where'd you learn it? Wow, how'd you learn it so well? Your accent is so good. Which parent? Which school? Right? And so these very notions, and these notions are built in through narratives of Latinidad as tied to Spain, this whitening, this constant push to whiten Latinidad, this constant presentation of Latinidad through whiteness and through the lens of whiteness, anti-Blackness among Latinos. And then that is the underlying ideology that drives all our measurement. You think the people that measure have somehow reckoned with that before they start counting or thinking about how to count and who to count and why and in what ways? And so when we then start counting, how do we count people? Which boxes do they check? And if they check them, where do they get counted? And which category are they a part of? And if those categories are supposed to be separate, can they be both? And if they're both, are they now multiracial? Oh, there's the new thing, right? Are they now multiracial? People go, oh, so you're black and Latino? Okay, so you're multiracial. You're black and what? I go black and black. They're waiting for the non-black parent because they're assuming the black parent isn't Latino. Because that separation in people's imaginaries is so powerful that they just literally cannot fathom black people in Latin America, black people speaking Spanish, black people being Latino in the United States, like, and anywhere. Like, they just can't, even though the majority of black people who were stolen from West Africa and brought to the Americas were taken to Latin America.
Right.
Right? And that's how powerful ideology is. But ideology shapes our measurement. And so when we think about why we can't get it right, why we can't get a number, well, who is actually Afro-Latino? What do people think that even means? What are we measuring and how are we measuring it? And then when we do that, what category do they fall in? It depends on who you ask. If you are asking Pew, the question is only asked to people who say they're Latino. So you have to say you're Latino first in order to actually then get the question Afro-Latino. And there are a lot of Afro-Latinos who actually don't identify as Latino. There's an interesting fact a lot of people don't know. So in Pew, you only get it if you're Latino first. Then you'll get that Afro-Latino question. But then when they say Afro-Latino, who would answer? I don't know. Maybe people who are black, absolutamente negro, but also somebody who saw a picture of a great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, somebody who took a 23andMe. I don't know, right? I don't know. And then if we ask the census who they're talking about, they'll say it's a person who checked black, and it's a person that checked Latino, maybe. And that might be one way they'll do it, right? Except that in Latin America, black is denigrated in many countries in such a way that many people don't check it, not even because they themselves don't see themselves as connected to Africa, but the word itself is denigrated in such a way that even laying claim to that as an identity is a struggle, which is why in first generation, so many first generation black Latinos opt out of race questions. So my research shows that by third generation, they don't, but in the first generation in the US, they do opt out because of that denigration of literally the term negro, the term black, right? So who actually is checking black? And the census won't mark you as black if you say you are Dominican, but they'll mark you as black if you say you're Haitian. But it's the same island. Are they waiting to see which side of the river you came from? You know, like, are you from Bocbanic or are you from Bocabanica? Like somehow there's a big difference between the people on each side of that river, right? And so the very nature of measurement becomes an issue, right? And so there's that part of it. And then there's the part of, okay, when we measure, if you can't be both and, or if you are, then when we count you, where do we count you and how do we count you? Especially now in a moment where we are talking about rights for Latinos and rights for black people. Now where do we count? Do we cut you in half and half your rights count for voting rights for black people and half your rights count for voting rights for Latinos? Do you get to count twice? Do you get to count once for your black and once for your Latino? Or do you get to not count as all as black, like the Office of Management and Budget has decided for employment and for education, black Latinos don't count as black at all. We are Latino regardless of race. We have no choice in that matter. And when you see statistics from the civil rights data collection on disparities in education, on discipline, on paddling, on other things, we are literally erased. We don't exist. We're in the Latino regardless of race category. If the school's all Latino, there is no racism because we're just all Latino. Because how could you be Latino and also anything else? So to your question of disaggregation, it's important. The question is, with our data, is it possible? A lot of the ways we collect it makes it impossible to disaggregate. I cannot tell you in a school that is just Latino students whether Black Latino students are being suspended and arrested at higher rates, or being blocked from calculus at higher rates, or being mistreated in particular ways. I just can't do it. I can't even find them in the data. They don't exist.
Wow, okay.
And that's erasure. And that's why it matters.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Jorge, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I don't doubt that these manipulations have an ulterior motive, right? But I also go back historically to see where these patterns started. When you go back to Spain, remember that I was talking about the Muslim presence in Spain, 800 years. During that particular timeline, the Moros and the Cristianos were getting along. The Cristianos were learning about Muslim ways, and the Muslims were learning Christian ways. They were changing clothes, they were eating different foods, they were talking together. When the Christian Crusades began in Spain, La Reconquista, that's when you begin to see in writing a lot of negative connotations about Blackness, about Muslims, about Islam. It was important to the Christians to denigrate and to animalize and to put down the Moros if you are to conquer them. And when the Spaniards arrived in the New World, unfortunately, those same notions of Blackness that were already rehearsed in Spain were transplanted to the Americas. That also connects with counting in some interesting ways. When in Puerto Rico, in the very early part of the 16th century, the Spanish conquest resulted in the decimation of the Indian population, not everybody really died away. What really happened was some people fled into the mountains. Cimarrones, right? Maroons. These are the predecessors of the African Maroons that will follow later on. The Europeans who needed the Indians to work for them had no choice but to write to the Spaniards in Spain, right, to the king and queen, and say, the king and queen would say, well, why can't you just use Indians? There are no Indians. They became extinguished. They vanished. They're not here. They're gone. We need Africans. They were Indians, right? But not the Indians that they wanted, because these Indians were resisting enslavement, and therefore they were not useful to them. So they use another trick. They reclassify Indians as mestizos. Now, there are no Indians, there are mestizos. See, we need to enslave Indians, but there are none. When you keep mestizos into the picture, now you have two labor force. The Indians, now mestizos, that you can enslave because they're not Indians, because Indian enslavement was already outlawed, right? So if you relabel them mestizos, you can enslave them. But you don't have to tell the Spanish that. You could just tell the Spanish that you need Africans. So this manipulation of numbers is something that is it has a very colonial heritage. This is something that we must get rid of. Right? If we are to follow through what we're saying here, part of that is to cast out this colonial mentality that continues to inform the way we look at people, the way we count them, and the way we label them.
So I think we're coming to a close in our conversation, and thank you for the three of you. But I think I want to leave the audience with some takeaways here. We talked about a shared history. We talked about shared experiences. We talked about the need to disaggregate and not be subsumed into one group or another and be a part of systematic structural erasure. And we talked about some of the challenges, the common challenges, whether someone mentioned the evolving immigration. We talked about, existing in Black bodies. But what I want to kind of just do a quick round robin and go across is to talk about some of the ways that these unique challenges, unique to Afro-Latinos, Latinx populations, how those things can be addressed, reimagined, rethought about to address some of the things that you identified as unique challenges and unique solutions for those issues with regards to Afro-Latinos.
From my perspective, as a historian, what really gets me and bothers me is that we sometimes homogenize Latinos in Latin America. We fail to distinguish between different subgroups within that family of people. The conditions of people of African descent in Latin America replicate in many ways what happens here with people of African descent in the United States. By failing to recognize that difference, we might not be putting into place whatever measures are necessary to correct that and create equality or at least equity, or at least remove some of those disadvantages, right? Some of those disabilities. And at the moment, we're not doing that. We have a sizable Black population in Colombia, in Cuba, in Santo Domingo, in Panama, in Puerto Limón, Costa Rica, in places in Mexico from Guerrero to Acapulco. We have them in the northern borderlands. We have them all throughout, even Haiti. Haiti needs to be included in that picture, and the reason why is because Spanish America would not have been free without the Haitian support, right? It was Haiti who said, here's the money, and here's some soldiers, Simon Bolivar, right? And when you get there and you do your job, I want you to free the slaves. And if you can't do that, don't come back for more money. We're not going to give it to you. And it took 20, 30, 40 years for each liberated territory to actually liberate the slaves. That's a shame. And so we need to look at those inequalities that are already embedded in Latin America when we think about immigration reform and look for ways to include the element of race and racial politics into that equation.
Thank you. Esmeralda.
As I said before, the real issue before us is how we can go forward together with a shared agenda. Not an agenda that's been thrust upon us, but an agenda that we identify. Our priorities, our shared priorities. The one that obviously pops up to mind is immigration. But I want you to know that we have just as much issues in healthcare, in education, in taking care of our elders. I'm ashamed to be in this country with the way they treat elderly people. The fact that they have to stand on food lines, and we call ourselves people of color, Africans, we call ourselves Black, and our people are standing on food lines. So there are many, many issues that we need to take up together, but we also have to understand that it is a broader issue about how we will be governed. How we will be governed. And that issue can only be done in coalition. If you don't remember anything else today, go out of here with the word trust, respect, and coalition. The only way forward is together.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to leave the last 30 seconds for Yasmyn.
Okay. So Hansel Owan recently had a report that covered one of the responses from, I believe it was Louisiana, to the jurisdiction, the case that they had. And one of the responses they sent to the Supreme Court was to reclassify who counted as Black, to limit it to just people who were Black alone or Black and white. That would exclude Black indigenous folks, Black Latinos, and then with the new categorization, Black North Africans, Black MENA, Black Melanesians. The question of Afro-Latinidad and Black Latinos and measurement and who counts is a question that is important for voting rights, for Black rights, and for Black collective power. And we need to have conversations about how that is being used and how that may be used as a way to challenge and to further, take away voting rights in places where we're already struggling, given what's happened with the Voting Rights Act. So that's one thing. The last thing I would just say is also understand that even among Black Latinos, there is immense diversity. And so it's important to understand there is important immigration and generational diversity, ethnic diversity, language diversity, and identity diversity, right? Because I see a lot of times people get caught up in memes about who people are, and that we need to remember that the diversity exists. It is a part of our history, and it's an important part of understanding how we get to liberation, is honoring that, understanding it, but also using it collectively towards that, right?
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jorge Chinea, Esmeralda Simmons, and Dr. Yasmyn Irizarry. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our distinguished panel. We are going to take a 2-minute break to mic our next set of speakers. This is also for the benefit of people that are seeing us like right now in live stream. So 2-minute break, we reset, and we continue with our incredible distinguished panel. We will have Q&A at the end, so please stand by until we reset the stage. Thank you.
It fell off. I don't know how.
So let's come back together to center our conversation right now. Hi, Amanda Renteria. I can feel the power when it walks into the room. I love it. That conversation really set us up nicely. So thank you to all the panelists who shared their stories. In fact, what I wanted to do with this panel, with such a distinguished panel, is to have a moment to ground ourselves in our stories. Because who we are, where we came from, where our ancestors came from, have defined the choices we've made. The places we said yes to, the ones we've said no to, and the moments we decided to speak up to. And it's not, I also want to acknowledge the moment that we're having this conversation at a time when the United States may be I like to say coronando, the first Black immigrant woman as President of the United States of America. It is a moment like none other. And I want to just stand here because we can't just look over it, that we're having this conversation in 2024, when the last couple of elections we've asked, where are Latinos at? How are they voting? What are they doing? Now we look to a new America, a new multiracial democracy, a new way of governing, and the leaders that are sitting to my right have been shaping that for decades. And so now we're stepping up in our leadership and owning our voices, owning our joy, our abundance, the places that we lead from. In fact, I'm just gonna say this, and I promise you won't hear a lot from me because you're here to hear from them. But yesterday, when they started playing music as the states were being announced, I actually thought about the Dominican Republic, because you know how elections are run in the DR? Con merengue y salsa.
Yeah?
So you know it's a campaign year when the trucks are coming up and down the streets, blasting music, and announcing, and bachata, let me not forget bachata, announcing the candidates, right? So there's something really special happening in the heart of America right now. And guess who's gonna be defining it? So I am honored to be here in the company of Maya Wiley, who's the head of the National Conference of Civil and Human Rights. My fellow Dominicana, Sabina Matos, who's the first Dominican lieutenant governor of the state of Providence, Rhode Island. She's the state of Rhode Island. I wanted to say the state of Providence because Dominicans rule in Providence. Let's just get it right. And so proud of this woman and how she not only led to become lieutenant governor, but how she's leading today and the values that have defined her leadership. And of course, you all know El Señor Marcos, who needs no introduction in this room, Marco Davis, who's now leading the National Hispanic, Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, CHCI. an incredible organization that is also redefining itself. I saw Sid Wilson in this room.
Yeah.
So
Right,
many,
yeah.
Sid. Like so many of our institutions are also redefining themselves because who's at the leadership, at the helm of these organizations. And Marco, you have been one of them. So I am honored and thankful to Jose Calderon who invited me. I was resting. I'm going to Santo Domingo tomorrow. And he said, you got to come and moderate this panel. And I said, yes, because of the people who I was going to be surrounded with.
Okay.
So let's continue the conversation that Yasmyn and Esmeralda started. Let's ground it in our stories, our ancestors, and why we're here. As a Black leader, as an Afro-Latino leader, what has shaped your decision to fight for social justice and to lead from a place of love and abundance?
Oh, you're looking at me.
Yes, Maya, I'm looking at you.
Well, first of all, I want to say how humbling it is to be here, how incredibly grateful I am for that first badass
Yes,
panel.
yes.
I mean, no.
Yes.
Look, that was the hotness, and that is my legal opinion. Because we don't have this conversation enough, and so thank you, Hispanic Federation.
Yes.
Thank you, Frankie.
Yeah.
Miranda.
Thank you.
One of our amazing and tremendous leaders, members of a leadership conference on civil and human rights, which I run, but Frankie is just an enormous treasure. And I have to also shout out Jose Calderon. Jose, who I have also had the deep privilege to work with before my current job, and Jose and I co-chaired, speaking of this conversation, what you heard beforehand, but really working on a multiracial coalition for improving the education of our children, and co-chairing that with Jose, who was an incredible resource and leader. So I just want to say that because there's history to all of our relationships in this work, as the previous panel said. But I will tell a personal story. So I've been Black all my life. Absolutamente. Pero sin español. Okay, but I have tried on the Spanish side. But I say that because, one, I think we heard in the previous panel, the conversation we were having was about being raced. And the way we're raced in a way to divide us. And there's a deep, long history to that, and it cross-cuts within our communities and in addition to across our communities. But my personal story is, and I'll share my mother's story, because my mother passed away in 2013, and I miss her every day. But she was a white woman, born and raised in Abilene, Texas. Oh, yeah, right. No, God didn't have anything to do with Abilene, Texas. No, and I mean that. A deeply Southern Baptist, deeply racist. And the thing about Abilene is that it radicalized her in the right way. In the right way. And what I mean by that is she used to tell this story. She obviously married a Black man. Okay, in case that wasn't clear. So I was totally feeling the story about what boxes you check. And also what it means to even have a family in which you don't even necessarily look like your family members if you're being raced, right? Which is what we're talking about a lot also when we look at the Afro-Latino community and diaspora and the African diaspora. But I say this because, so you had the Black racism, anti-Black racism in Abilene, but the largest community was Mexican American. And I remember her telling the story about, so all the Jim Crow stories, that we grew up with in the Black Civil Rights Movement, the way she was radicalized started with just trying to go get some Mexican food. Because she knew the best Mexican food, and the story was, was on the other side of the tracks. So just like we have railroad tracks everywhere, the Mexican-American community was on the other side of the tracks. And so she and her girlfriends in high school wanted to go get the good Mexican food. They drove in a car, and the phone tree started household to household to household of all the parents saying, you know where your daughters are going? And going and getting them and stopping them just from going to eat some good damn food. But for her, it was like, this doesn't make any sense. And then she was the first person who taught me how we don't learn history. Because she actually was explaining to me how much the lying about the Alamo was a part of her upbringing. And her having to explore on her own as someone with that personal experience of feeling something was wrong, but having to dig personally and individually outside of her education to understand what she was missing, and to understand that actually she was standing on soil that the people across the tracks owned. Owned, right? And so she grew up understanding anti-black racism and anti-Mexican, and it was very specifically Mexican there, anti-Mexican racism in a deeply personal way. And when she left, she got on a plane and never went back, and told me I would never go to Abilene. But where she landed was Harlem. You cannot make this stuff up. She landed in Harlem, never lived with black people or Latinos, and the first place she goes is to East Harlem, to a block in East Harlem, in El Barrio, and starts working with young women around sexuality. In 1957, this white woman, and she realized very quickly, and she said this all her life, that they taught her more than she taught them. And that's the stock I come from proudly.
I love that. Thank you, Maya.
Thank you. So I have to share with everyone that I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic.
Woohoo!
So because that tells you a lot about my experience as a Black woman, an Afro-Latina, and more of what you're gonna hear after. I came to the United States as an adult. I was 20 years old when I came and needed to learn the language. As Congressman Espaillat always says, the mothership is Washington Heights. That's where I arrived. Stayed there for 3 months and then moved to Rhode Island, worked in the factories, the jewelry factories, and then my parents' education was important for them, went to school into Rhode Island College after learning the language. And I wanted for you to understand that I grew up in Dominican Republic. Then I get to the United States, and I'm faced with this discovering that I have to go through this process of myself, going to college, and learning from other communities that I was meeting here in the United States as an adult, which is different experience learning as an adult. And then finding myself lost about where do I belong, because I feel like I'm being pushed for one side to the next, and I have to pick. And while I was going to college, on my identity as Afro-Latina based on what I was learning. And you wanted to know also what motivated us to get involved, and something that I don't want to forget is, when I was in the 7th or 8th grade in the Dominican Republic, I read a poem by Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, Hombres Necios. And I don't know why that just opened my mind and helped me understand, like, all this that I've been feeling is okay. Like I'm not wrong. There's other people that feel this. So what have motivated me the most is to get women in leadership position, to fight society labels in stigma that they have for women, and especially within the Black and brown community and the Latino community. And I'm bringing this back to my experience here in the United States. I ran for city council in Providence, was elected in 2010, eventually became the council president of the Providence City Council. And I know for time I'm gonna be brief. My husband always says that I make it sound so easy to be Sabina Matos, but for timing. And I was appointed lieutenant governor of the state of Rhode Island when our governor was appointed to Secretary of Commerce, Raimundo. I was very intentional about how I wanted the press release to go out. I knew that a lot of people in my Latino community were gonna feel very proud because I was gonna be, or I was appointed the first person of color and the second woman lieutenant governor on the state of Rhode Island. And I knew Latinos were gonna be very proud. And I wanted to make sure that the press release identified me as a Black woman, because I think that this is a discussion that we need to have more among Latinos. There was a pushback with the communication team, and they said, well, but you're really not a Black woman, right? So we settled on, well, I told them, listen, I have identified myself as Afro-Latina for a long time. If you feel more comfortable, you use that term. And I was expecting that my Latino community, my Dominicans was gonna go like, wait, what's going on? Because I wanted to have that conversation, right? I wanted to have the conversation. Instead, I got pushed back actually from some Black women in Rhode Island that felt that I was just identifying myself as Afro-Latina and Black just because it was in fashion, right? And I'm saying this for you to understand the struggle that we go through as Afro-Latinos in leadership position, because it feels that we always have to be picking one side or the other. And I heard this from the Latino community. It's like, you are identifying yourself as Black, like you belong to us, you know? And then I get this pushback from the Black community. And I wish that we all could understand that we have more power if we work together and we are working in collaboration. So I'm gonna stop here.
Muy buenas tardes. My personal story, every story is unique, no question. My personal story you won't hear too often, but as you'll see in a minute, my experiences are not that different. And I think that is the very short version of what brings me to this work. You see, I was born and raised in the city of Mount Vernon, New York, a majority Black city. The first Black mayor in the state of New York was in Mount Vernon, New York, but it also had not well known, a sizable Latino community, largely Caribbean American. I am the son of a mother from Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. I'm the son of immigrants. I am the son of a father from Hope Bay, Jamaica. And so my experience was an interesting one, to say the least. Speaking of choosing and either other, et cetera, I used to joke when I talk to young people that I grew up in the era of fractions because it was totally acceptable to say I'm half Jamaican and half Mexican. Finally, thankfully, we've moved beyond that language now. As the previous panel mentioned, we don't carve ourselves up into percentages. But interestingly, I think in some ways, unintentionally and to my benefit, but making my life complicated, both my parents, as you can imagine, coming from their respective countries, arriving to the US as adults, were deeply rooted in their culture and in their identities. And thankfully for me, they were also quite fearless and engaged and navigated both their own and other communities and each other's, frankly, communities quite effortlessly and made it seem quite normal so that as kids, we didn't quite realize how unusual they were. But unfortunately, as a result of that, and again, part of, will become obvious in a minute, a lot of my upbringing essentially was as a split personality. There was essentially times, most notably when I was in Mount Vernon, when I was Black. And I connected to my Black identity and to some extent also Jamaican culture and through my dad. And then, for example, summer vacation or over Christmas when we would go back to Mexico, then I was Mexicano. And in those days, pre-internet, like nobody knew about the black population in Mexico. Not nobody, obviously, but we didn't know about it. And in Guadalajara, it certainly wasn't talked about because Guadalajara is Western, right? It wasn't anywhere near the Caribbean. And so it literally, I literally would sort of, to the point which still freaks people out, just the last, sorry, and I'll also try to be brief, but the thing I think that encapsulates it most perfectly for me is, my father actually had the good fortune of being fluent in Spanish. And so he named me Marco Antonio. He chose the boy, my mom chose the boy. But he actually named me, being Jamaican, which used to be a British colony, I am named for Mark Antony from the Julius Caesar play by Shakespeare. And therefore, my entire family, my two older sisters and I, who are fully bilingual, when we are speaking Spanish, when any of my family members speak Spanish, they say Marco. But when any of us are speaking English with me, they call me Mark. And that's something that to this day in 2024 confuses people. To this day, people are like, but which do you prefer? I'm like, well, which language are you speaking? Yeah. I can't tell you how fun it is to have people say it in the English pronunciation, Marco, which is immediately followed by Polo. Thank you very much. That took longer than I thought.
That's because it was embarrassing.
So on occasion, I'm like, if you can say Marco, that doesn't usually, anyway. So long story short, I didn't know I was allowed to be both, right?
Yes.
If you think about it, I didn't understand that I could be integrated in identity. That's part of why, for me, this sense of Afro-Latinidad is so, so critical, so important. And because I do leadership development now and have really for the majority of my career, it's so, so incredibly important that younger people see themselves and understand that they can be a multitude. To see that a term that got well known and is now sort of thrown out, I think almost too loosely, that we've sort of lost track of the complexity and the nuance of it, that intersectionality is something that we live very, very deeply. Yes. And that is something that complicates sometimes our lives and our experiences, but shouldn't necessarily be an impediment, shouldn't be a barrier.
Love it.
And so for me, I'm therefore proud to be Jamaican. I'm proud to be Chicano. Proud to be a New Yorker for that matter. But I'm also proud fundamentally to be Afro-Latino. And that's what brings me to this one.
Love it. Thank you. I know I was going to love this conversation. Let's keep digging into this layer of complexities, both the good, bad, and the ugly. Because in order to heal, we have to expose, right? Marco, you mentioned the lack of internet before. I grew up listening to Toña La Negra. My dad loved her. I thought she was Dominican until a decade ago, like when I thought she was ours. And she's from Veracruz, Mexico. But artists like Toña La Negra and Celia Cruz have sang about the complexities, the Angelito Negros, right? The painful realities that them as artists have experienced. You alluded to it a little bit. But I want to surface it for a second, because what I want to get at is the generation that's growing up right now is going to live this reality more so, because there is this interconnection that's happening with families, all of it, more so than even in our generation. So how do we begin to have conversations in open settings like this where we can heal the erasure and the anti-Blackness within our own, so we can come out proudly on the outside and say, yes, I am Black and I am Dominican, and begin to build those bridges that we know so well? And what is demanded of us from the Black community to acknowledge at this moment to be able to move forward? So I'm going to reverse it and start with you, Marco, and with Maya.
Wait, so what is the...
Healing. What is required of us at this moment, both to expose what needs to be exposed, but do it in a way where we're not also tearing more down. And again, Luis Miranda just left, but when In the Heights came out, I was proud of that film. I was so proud of that film because of the 4 leading actors, 2 were Black. 1 was Dominican, but 2 were Black. And here was a writer and producer that was bringing our stories. And the reason I wanted to take all the time you want, stories matter. We love Michelle Obama because stories matter.
Yes.
And our country needs to hear our stories. Yeah. But with it comes some painful realities that we do amongst ourselves. How do we heal from that, Marco? How do we cross it over and expose it in a way that doesn't tear down?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. At least I'd start by sort of saying, I think, two things I think come to mind. One is, I think, in order to heal, we have to get to the root. We have to sort of dig out the illness, right? We have to get to the core. And so I think there is a process that we need to go through internally within the Latino community, within the Latina community, to acknowledge sort of past harm, to use sort of the current parlance. I think we have to recognize the bias and the anti-Blackness that exists in our community and realize, A, that it's there and not sugarcoat it, not diminish it, not dismiss it, but also not dwell on it and also not make it a blame game. Because we have to understand where it comes from, which is learned racism, which people have described for me, which I've always found really, really helpful. Racism is essentially a disease that is sort of like in the air, and therefore we're all infected by it. We're all harmed by it. We're all victims of the racism, and therefore that includes our community. And so it's not so much that every single person who has this anti-bias, it's not so much that those, sadly, also very painfully, some of our own relatives who express some of the most unappealing, to be generous and kind, comments and statements are mean-spirited, hateful people. It's that that's all they've ever heard. That's all they've learned, right? It played out in very different ways, but the racism exists still to this day all throughout Latin America, again, differently, but just as much as it does in the United States. So I think we start there in realizing that. But again, and again, realizing that so that we can move beyond it, so that we can understand. And for me, at least, the best hope, I think, is to also, to flip it, which I think one of the beautiful things, the incredible things I think to do is to continue to lift up all of the incredible work that's being done now, and that has, again, as was acknowledged by the previous man, is actually also not new, going way, way back to when it was a common movement, to when there was conscious and even automatic, almost unconscious solidarity and unity in work, both in struggle for social justice and for rights, but also even in the celebration of culture. You just mentioned artists, people like Celia Cruz, that embraced it. Speaking of the history lessons, I too was a history major. I was thinking like the next chapter of the piece from our previous panel and talking about where everybody was there together, speaking of something that we can all acknowledge, I would say this week in particular, something that is quintessentially American, it is now undeniable, it's quintessentially American, is hip-hop culture, which again, when you actually read and learn your real history, was begun by Black and Latino young people from the very beginning. The stories maybe didn't tell it that way. The racialization of society kind of erased the Latino component. But that's yet another chapter in that history of our community's work. And so anyway, the point is to celebrate the places where we have to come, the ways in which we have come. I mean, the personal stories people have talked about, they're everywhere. They're just not talked about. And I think that's one way to heal, is to realize we're not asking people to do something that's never been done before. We're not asking people to do something brand new. It's all around us where there are examples of our communities together. I would argue, or at least I would hope, and I think we could create a new narrative of the fact that the places where we are truly divided, where there is that problem, is more exception than rule. And when that is something that we all truly both live and understand and believe, it'll be much easier for us to continue to work together.
That's good. Thank you, Marco.
Yeah, definitely. I agree that we need to have conversations first among Latinos and honest conversations about race and racism within the Latino communities. This is part of what we have to do among Latinos first, but also we need to have the opportunities and look for opportunities in which we do work together in collaboration, Latinos and African Americans, Black here in the United States. I remember from when I was running for office, for the office of Lieutenant Governor the first time. I mentioned I was very intentional about how I wanted to identify myself in the communications. I wanted to make sure, I'm Dominican, you know, we like a blowout, right? So I wanted to make sure that I was gonna leave my hair curly for the main event. Because I wanted to send a message to the Latino girls, the Black girls, little girls in the school, the young women, to know that it is okay to be who you are, and it's okay. You don't need to necessarily have your hair done with the rolos and all that. Like I'm who I am the way that I am. And if you see all the pictures from the ceremonies, the main events, I had my hair curly. Then I remember speaking with some of my supporters, people that support me, right? Latinos, Dominicans, that they're so happy, so proud, and they tell me, ¿y esta negrita, qué es lo que se cree? So, and that talks a lot about our, the racism that we have so much within our culture that we need to educate ourselves and educate our community. That, because the way how they say it is that because I'm Black, I should not have accomplished what I have accomplished, you know? And we need to have these conversations among the Latino communities, because this is the reality that we are facing. And this is what is hurting our children, our young women, when we hear those comments. And we need to have honest conversation among the Latinos about race, and also we need to work with the Black community in how we accomplish things together, because we're stronger when we work together. Just really quick, I'm gonna say something also about the hair. When I was running for Lieutenant Governor, and this is a lesson, just because we make mistakes, and I just I want to be honest and admit this. I had some white consultants, right, that told me that I go back between my curly hair and my straight hair.
It's gonna confuse people.
And that because of marketing, I needed to pick one and just go with one. So I went back to my straight hair because I thought it was gonna be easier, right? But then I didn't feel like I was being honest with myself, because I really love that I can do both. Yeah? And I should be accepted the way I am.
That's right.
And my next campaign is gonna have both, so people get used to having the curly hair and the straight hair, and they can recognize me both ways.
I love that. I love that. I love that. I love that.
I learned my lesson.
I love that. Maya.
Well,
I
first
know.
of all, that's hard to follow, all of that, so thank you both. Look, I'm going to make it real plain. I'm very, 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 very lucky, because I sit in a seat to support over 250 national organizations on civil and human rights. And Frankie, you know, Hispanic Federation is one of them. Unidos is one of them. LULAC is one of them. But so too are the legacy Black civil rights organizations of the civil rights movement. So too are the Asian American, Pacific, and Hawaiian communities of this nation. So too are people with disabilities who, by the way, don't come in a single package.
That's right.
In fact, not all disabilities are visible.
That's right.
And so, I mean, I could go on and on, right? And every single one of those organizations have all these different experiences and all these different, but here is where I get real practical. all the stories we just heard are so important, and I want to say very clearly, the conversations we have to have within communities are real. I mean, even if we take out the Afro-Latino, which I don't think we can, by the way, we'd be talking about the descendants of North American slaves versus the descendants of slaves who came from Black Caribbean countries, right? I mean, we got these tensions all over the dang place. But there is a root cause that is a shared one. And it is not a disease. It's some concrete that got poured, laid in the foundation of the country. And it's the original sins of slavery, of genocide against indigenous populations, of the racism in our immigration laws, which, remember, until the civil rights movement in the 1960s actually had provisions that said you had to be Caucasian to be able to come in and get legal status. I mean, all these things are foundational. And even if we, and I'm going to bring it forward to today, so, because I love what you actually said about the importance of us, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to get and do the work together.
Yes.
We're going to do the work together. Because it was, remember what, he's still my president, y'all. President Barack Obama said last night, right? He said, we are no longer having building relationships with one another. And so as a result, we have politicians and algorithms coming between us. By the way, those algorithms and those politicians who are coming between us are coming between us trying to tell Latinos and people who are Black, and I forget all the diversity within all of that, that we should have a problem with one another.
Yes.
That this pie with the slices that are too small are some crumbs we're supposed to fight with each other for. That if we want our schools to be good, right, Jose? We want our schools to be good, we should fight bilingual education.
That's right.
Because then some of our kids won't get something they need. Y'all seen the research on what bilingual education does to literacy? You seen the world we live in? I think we have the world right here in the United States. My child's going to Japan learning Japanese right now. It's real hella confusing, y'all.
Yes.
But guess what? I don't know why she has to get that outside of school any more than I wonder why it's a struggle to get Creole or Spanish or Urdu or any other language. But I'm only saying this because that concrete that got poured is the concrete we have to work together to break apart. Because when they're banning books, they're banning all of our history.
That's right.
Can I just tell you they have banned a child's biography of Roberto Clemente?
Oh my God.
I mean, okay, y'all. When and where does that threaten somebody? But if we let them, I mean, so the conversation we have to have is what do we need to understand about that history that they don't want us to learn, just like they don't want us to read The Color Purple. So I mean, I think it is incredibly important that we hear our stories. I think it's incredibly important that we understand the complexities of how we are being raced. And how that being raced is supposed to drive us apart. Because in doing the work, we create the rooms in which we have the hard conversations. That's what coalition is. Jose brought some hard conversations to the coalitional work we were doing on improving our schools in New York City. We had to have them, but we had them in a diverse room. We have to have them where we're all able to come and bring our experiences and stories, but to do it as solving our shared problems.
That's right.
Because the one thing that my white mother taught me was if we are not focused on the solutions together and understanding what makes it work for all of us, and it might not work the same way for all of us. It has nothing to do with whether we can work on it together. Not a damn thing. So I just want to say that I am so here for it. And just as we heard Michelle Obama say last night, don't nobody
nice.
have a monopoly
That's right,
on
on what
who's an
America.
American, what an American
That's right.
is.
That's right. That's right.
And it is not a passport.
That's right.
It is not a hue. It is not a language. It's just a people.
I love it. Love it. So good. So good. So let's move from hard to heart conversations, because your experience, Honorable Matos, I want to bring it back out into this conversation, because we have not seen the America we all long for yet.
No.
But we're sitting on the brink of redefining it. Has yet to have existed, but we can define and redefine. Your story on your communications team and your hair is real.
Yeah.
And when Michelle Obama stepped into that stage with her braids,
I love it.
that in and of itself was a statement
Yes,
to America.
Totally.
Because
Totally.
when we come into these roles in the fullness of who we are, embracing the complexities of who we are, not being defined by someone saying, well, if you take that podium, you gotta look this way, even though your hue is a little darker, but you still gotta mix it in a little bit to look closer to that. When we say no to that and say, I am this, and define it, then we begin to redefine America. So this conversation up here is real and important.
Yeah.
So let's shift, because the hard happens with the heart. And if we are going to be in that room, then we need to talk about the hair, the culture, the art, all of it. When we start talking about policy, let's draw it together, because the shared problems have shared solutions who come from a shared experience that center from a shared history, right? So let's talk about the shared future that we want. I want to start with you, Honorable Matos, now. Let's talk about legislation and policy. We have talked about a shared agenda. I want to use this space, because I know Jose wants to go there in terms of policies, right? Legislation. What does a shared agenda look like?
No, thank you. I wanted to add a little bit to the comment that Maya made, because I remember when you were speaking, just last year, I got my communication director got an email from one of the most respected media in Rhode Island, this older white woman, reporter, and she wanted to know why I identify myself as Afro-Latina. And the question was, which one of my parents was of African descent? I never felt more insulted and denigrated than having to explain my identity to this reporter that wants to make an issue of it, because they want to divide us. They want to keep us divided. So I just wanted to mention that, because this is real. This is the fight that we need to have to make sure that we don't let them divide us, because when they do, we lose and they win. But going to your question, one of the critical moments for me after I became Lieutenant Governor, after the process of the appointment, everything came kind of fast, and I felt like a little bit like, why this is happening to me? Why me? Why now? Sometimes you feel like, do I belong here, right? And I remember we were still in the middle of the pandemic, and the governor and I were visiting different vaccination centers. And I remember arriving to this vaccination clinic in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, which is a community of very low resources. And several of the Boys and Girls Club youth were part of this event. When I was walking, these young, mostly women of color, young women of color, got up and got so excited and started clapping. And I was looking around to see who they were clapping for. But that moment helped me understand that if I was questioning why me, why now, like what was happening or what had been happening is not about me, but it's about them. So when we talk about what is our shared agenda and how we move forward together, is how do we provide for young people, like those young girls that I saw that day, to make sure that they have the education, the resources that they need to move forward. How do we provide for them to have support for after school, that they're able to explore different education paths, and they're able to, if they want to go to college and don't have to be burdened by student loan debt. So to me, that is part of the agenda in which we have to work in collaboration.
Thank you. Marco and then Maya.
Two things come to mind when thinking about sort of how to build a policy future. One is, I think, there are numerous, if not countless, places where we can simply be driven by the data. When you look at things like median income, when you look at things like unemployment, when you look at things like home ownership rates, when you look at things like access to healthcare, access to quality schools, et cetera, when you disaggregate fully, you may find that the numbers, the percentages, the likelihood for the Latinx community and the Black community are not the same. Sometimes one is higher, sometimes the other is higher. But in so many cases, the difference between those two is much, much smaller than the difference between either and the white population. So for starters, when you look at ways in which you want to have a rising tide lift all boats, when you want to try to create beneficial policy, and part of the policy game certainly is sort of aggregating numbers and being driven by data, you actually have natural correlations. When you get past personal bias, when you get past narrow-mindedness, you can sort of find that the data can actually give you the answer all in one hand. The other thing I was going to say is, as I thought about this, was there is a concept which at least, I don't know if she created, but certainly I've heard it from her and was popularized by none other than Angela Glover Blackwell, which is called targeted universalism.
Yeah.
And the example she gives is actually from the disability community, which is really an excellent sort of illustrative thing. If you walk down your average city street and you get to a corner, you almost always find what's known as a curb cut, where instead of just being the right angle curve of the sidewalk, there's a slant. Those efforts were brought about from the disability community and the Americans with Disabilities Act to allow for facilitation of people in wheelchairs and people with issues around mobility to be able to navigate a city just as easily as anyone else. But the thing is, when you look around now, if you see a parent with a stroller, they're using that curb.
That's right.
Yeah.
When you see a traveler heading to or from the airport, lugging their rollerboard luggage, they're using that curb cut.
That's right.
That solution that was fought for, probably uniquely by the disability community, I suspect back when, because that's been around a while, I suspect there weren't too many allies, because they were like, that's extra, it's expensive, investment, infrastructure. I'm sure there was all sorts of resistance to the idea. You want us to go back and change all the sidewalks? Are you crazy? Right? But now everyone benefits from it. And it's actually helped many, many more people than just the population it was originally designed for. For me, it's one of the greatest metaphors.
That's right.
And so there's many places. Maya alluded to the fact, bilingual education, which in very fancy circles these days, based on people weaponizing the term, is now referred to as dual language immersion.
Yes.
People have come to realize it benefits the non-native English speaker and it benefits the native English speaker alike. The literacy rates go up. The academic achievement goes up. Speaking two language benefits every student in the classroom, not just the English language learner, right, in the classroom. And so there are ways, there's countless with just a little creativity.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, people of color
Creative.
knows a thing or two about creativity
That's
because we've had to. So there are plenty of solutions that can be brought up that, again, we may start out having to fight for us and ourselves, but they are really, truly going to help everyone, and we can prove it.
Thanks, Marco.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to start with the American with Disabilities Act because actually the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights was a coalition that fought actively for and helped win the Americans with Disabilities Act for that reason, because it was necessary for everyone. And all our communities worked on it, and all our communities needed it, right? So I'm going to be very, very specific about what we have to do right now.
That's good.
And it's in addition to all these things, right? But voting rights, and then there's voting rights, and then we should work on voting rights.
And don't forget about
That's my
voting
top
rights.
three.
There you go.
Yes.
So let's, the big lie.
Yes.
What's driving the big lie? Who is it who's showing up and voting, not supposed to vote, and doing all that voter fraud that doesn't exist, that nobody can find any data for? You're, by the way, more likely to get struck by lightning than to find somebody who voted who did so unlawfully. Okay? And that's a fact. So this is a point. We are watching the fundamental attack on simply holding on to the democracy we fought for and earned. It wasn't given to us. This country didn't have it without us. It wouldn't have it without us. And helped everyone. But it is on the backs of immigration, but not all immigration. Not all immigration. Very clear which immigrants are actually just crossing the border to unlawfully vote in our elections and then rape people. But I mean, no, look, that is the racism that we are seeing. But guess who also in black communities? I mean, so it's all us who somehow are stealing elections by voting lawfully. And that it's that voting, that very basic democratic act, that is being utilized to pass laws to make it harder for us to actually do what we are guaranteed a fundamental right to do. But the only way we're getting that back is if we are collectively work on passing Freedom to Vote Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Protection Act, and the Native American Voting Rights Act. Leave no community behind. And we have to see them as one package because they're all necessary. And if we do that, we can talk about, we will always talk about maternal health in schools and all the things, but I'm just saying that we don't win those things if they take our power away, and we won't let them.
That's true.
We won't let them. But here's the other thing. That means black community is going to say, no, you can't come for the Latino community no matter what hue. Or whether you straighten your hair or not. You can't come for the AAPI community. You can't come for transgender people who have pronouns that, yes, you must use even if you don't like it. And you can't use bathroom laws to claim somehow that folks shouldn't have a basic human right to vote. Okay? So I'm just saying that because this is job one right now. And we even have a lobby day as a coalition on September 10th to make sure we're keeping it alive. But this is the point. We are keeping it alive for all of us. And the conversation we were having about data and how to collect it in the census, guess what that is? Something we have to use our voting rights to then have more fights about. So voting, voting, voting.
Just give it up for this panel. Extraordinary panel, extraordinary panel. We could have sat here, Jose, for another hour and a half because we didn't even talk about black jobs, Hispanic jobs, all that which we are creating, by the way. Because who creates more jobs in small business leaders, and guess who's starting businesses in America? So I want to acknowledge the fact that Congressman Maxwell Alejandro Frost is here. He's going to join our panel. I want to invite him up to the stage to say some remarks. So nice to meet you. So good to see you. Yeah, the podium, please.
How's everybody doing?
Good.
I have some tea here because I'm speaking somewhere tomorrow. My voice needs to be good. But y'all, I've been sitting and listening for the last 15 to 20 minutes, and I just resonate so deeply with everything that's been said. For people who don't know, I'm Maxwell Alejandro Frost. I'm a congressman. I represent Florida's 10th Congressional District, which is Orlando, Florida. I'm the first member of my generation in Congress, but more relevant to this, I'm also the first black Cuban to be in Congress as well. You know, I struggled with my identity throughout my whole life for many different reasons. One of the biggest reasons is, of course, the fact that I'm Afro-Latino, but also the fact that I'm an adoptee. My mom is Cuban. She came here from Cuba during the late 1960s during the freedom flights. My biological mother is Lebanese and Puerto Rican. Wow. My biological father is Haitian. And my father is a white guy from Kansas who was raised in Bermuda and now plays the steel pans for a living. So I got a lot going on. And I'm sure, you know, the topic has been covered about a lot of the anti-blackness we find in a lot of our own communities. And, you know, as I grew up, I spent a lot of time in North Miami, a lot of time in North Cuba, which is Hialeah, Florida. That's where my mom's whole family lived. That's where my grandma lived. My yeyita, she passed away about 1.5 years ago. And something that I always struggled with was my blackness growing up. I didn't have any black people in my immediate household. I went to an elementary school that really didn't have many black people in it. And as I grew up, I had a lot of anti-blackness ingrained in me for many different reasons. My environment, but also, and I'm just gonna be honest because we're all friends here, many people in my own family. I remember growing up and having a lot of my aunts always come up to me and in Spanish tell me that I needed to go and straighten my hair to make it look pretty, para ser lindo. I remember when people would say I'm black in elementary school, I was always fast to tell them, no, I'm brown. I'm not black, I'm brown. Because I didn't want to be black somewhere in the back of my head, back of my mind. And when I think about the time where I came to terms with my blackness and the fact that I'm Latino at the same time, was later on in high school. And it was actually two things. One, it was my barber. My barber, Chris, who cut my hair. It was those late nights on YouTube finding out how to take care of my hair. It was those late nights texting my barber, Chris, trying to learn how he could help me. I love my mom so much. God bless her. She brought me to great clips, and they didn't do it right. But when I finally started going to Chris, I finally learned what it meant to take care of my hair the way it is. And it was also music. I went to an arts middle school in high school, and it was there that I fell in love. I was always a drummer. I've been drumming since the 2nd grade. But I went to a school in Kissimmee, Florida. Y'all know Kissimmee?
Yeah.
It's 80% Puerto Rican.
Yes,
okay?
That's right.
It's Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
It's Puerto Rico. We, in our jazz band, played a lot of swing, we played a lot of jazz, but we also played a lot of salsa. And it was there that I fell in love with playing the timbales. And I remember for Christmas, I begged my parents to get me a pair of Matador, Tito Puente, and timbales, and when I got them, I played them every day. And then I made a salsa band with my best friends. Well, my dad's a musician, so we always had a studio in the house. So, pobrecito, my mom. I made a salsa band with my best friends, and I volunteered on Barack Obama's re-election campaign. I wanted to go to the inauguration. So I went on the website to buy tickets. I didn't know how to do it. I was just, So I was online trying to buy tickets that said, apply to perform. So I sent in a video of us playing salsa, and we ended up getting accepted to represent the state of Florida. And we were the first salsa band in the history of this country to perform in a presidential inaugural parade. A bunch of 15 and 16-year-olds from Kissimmee. It was music, my love of jazz, my love of salsa. my barber and all in all culture
Yes.
and being exposed to
Yes.
culture and community
Yes. Yes.
that put me in a place where I not just accepted but was proud
Yes.
to be a black man
Yes.
and proud to be a Latino. And then the Lebanese part's very new for me. I just learned that a year and a half ago. The Haitian part is also very new for me. So when I'm in my community, the Haitian community has claimed me, and the Lebanese community has claimed me. So they're teaching me a little bit more about myself. But it's beautiful. The last thing I'll tell you is during my campaign, I was triggered a lot of the time because a lot of the identity issues I had growing up came up again. I'd be in certain parts of my town at events led by folks in the black community and have random people come up to me and say, Maxwell, you know, I heard you're not really black. I'm like, all right. Then I go to another event, you know, an abuelo comes up to me and goes, you know, I heard you're not actually Latino. I heard you're not a real Latino. And those rumors went around during the whole campaign. They would come up all the time. And I was very proud on the day I won my campaign and the day on every local news station. They said, of course, you know, he's the youngest member. That's what everyone knows. He'll be the first black Afro-Cubano to be in Congress. And I represent one of the most diverse communities in the country. Diverse in the truest sense of the word. You know, sometimes it's like a lot of one minority and people say diverse, but it's not actually, that doesn't mean diverse. My community is actually like diverse. We have everybody there. And I'm so proud to represent them because I am them in many sense. And so we just have so much work to do in our community from a place of love. You know, I love all my family members that have a lot of anti-blackness in them. It's not that, you know, they made a decision, they grew up that way. But the love that I've shown them and the honest, frank conversations I've had with them have helped them develop and have honestly helped me develop as a political leader in my ability to have frank conversations with anybody. And so I'm just honored to be here. I know these three panelists here, amazing, badass people in their own right. But the last thing I'll say is, you know, centering community, centering culture. You don't know what kid you'll inspire and what kid you'll show just who they are. Okay, thank you so much, y'all. And thank you to the Hispanic Federation.
So proud, thank you. So fun. Don't go. I think we had 2 or 3 minutes for questions, but I just want to end just because you gave me the moderator tool. But there's a scripture verse from Esther for such a time as this. And I just want you to look around, panel, look around the room. But we've been appointed to lead for such a time as this.
That's right. Yeah.
So as we redefine what this democracy nation looks like, it looks like this room and this panel. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
So do we want to take questions? Okay, so sit, Maxwell, and I'll moderate from the stage.
Okay.
Please. So wanted to open up to some questions in the room. Yes, go ahead.
So, my name is Paula Jean, so I live here on the south side of Chicago. I'm a Latina that owns an African safari camping company. So it's a black and brown partnership, so it's very interesting times. I was boots on the ground when the Venezuelan migrants came, and there was a lot of black people that were just very racist against that. A lot of ignorance going on, a lot of misinformation. And I'm still in that community, and I gather my community and all that stuff, but really, I'm here to just implore you that we need help. So we've gotten to a stage that I wouldn't say that the Venezuelans are accepted, and they're not even Venezuelans, all of them, they're Colombians, who might have originally from Colombia. Again, very diverse background, learning all that stuff. But we do need help with people that have a name, that have voice, that can bring together these black and brown communities, and people can see themselves represented, because it is hard out there, y'all. The only reason I haven't gotten beat up is because every time I went and spoke, I was pregnant. So I was pregnant or I had my 1-year-old child. But I am just asking for help because people need to see this representation, and we do not have it on the south side of Chicago.
Thank you.
So I'm just asking for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I don't think it was a question, but an all-out call for help, which I think we're all standing here. So I know the Congressman only has 2 minutes, so maybe just one question. Yes, Sid, please, go ahead.
The mic.
Yeah.
Go, Sid.
For the streaming.
Real quickly, Sid Wilson, Hasera, Hispanic Associate, by the way, Jack, awesome moderating. I just want a quick shout out because Marco Davis is very humble, but what many of you don't know is that this past February, Marco organized the first ever White House Afro-Latino It's now officially on the White House record for the first time that there was a proclamation recognizing Afro-Latinos. That has never happened before in U.S. history. And so I just want to make sure that everyone, we publicly acknowledge Marco for that. So a big thank you for that.
Thank you,
just
Sid.
like quick,
Thank you, Sid.
on that. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Sid. All right. One quick question. Go ahead.
Such great information. I'm one of those fortunate people who belong to a number of national organizations where we get to actually share information and legislation. And so I am New York State Assembly Member Stephanie Zennerman, representing the 56th District in Brooklyn, New York, the mecca of all things arts and culture. But during this time, such great information, there we have an opportunity to share our legislative agendas and ensure that whether you're talking about the 3 voting rights bills, that they are all entered as an omnibus. What are some of the recommendations, other recommendations that you would have for legislators to share, and so that in every place that we are, all 50 states and the 7 territories, we are taking care of our business collectively as a coalition of color?
Yes, love that.
So I have a legislation that I think we should all be working together, and it's the MBEs and WBEs laws, because I can tell you in the state of Rhode Island, it has been used almost like a fight for a little bit of the pie. All of us are fighting for the 10%, and now it's a 15%, and we don't see that there's a whole pie left out there that we're not getting access to because they keep us fighting for this little bit. So the MBEs, WBE laws, because that's how we create economic empowerment for our communities. We should be working together on that.
Congressman, do you want to go?
I mean,
Thank you.
you know, one thing I'd say too, I mean, of course, you know, standalone bills and being really important, but this is why it's so, representation is such an important thing, and having folks in the room. We should be looking through this lens with all pieces of legislation, no matter what it is, right? And having folks in the room on these committees who, as we read through this, can identify issues or gaps that exist from appropriations bills and where money is going and where and how it's being distributed, which is very important here. And also, of course, laws that dictate the way we live our lives. Another thing I'll say is, I think we're seeing on full display right now what it means when that's absent, and not just absent, but when there's hostility in the room. Look at just recently what Donald Trump said about Kamala Harris. It's like he doesn't understand.
Oh, he understands.
Or he understands. He understands he's being racist. He's being a bigot. When he said that she was Indian and then she turned black.
Yes.
And now he wants the black job.
And we know that's racist and bigoted, but the other thing we need to think about is, what does that mean when that type of person is in charge of legislation? When that type of person is in charge of appropriating and sending money to our communities? The last thing I'll say, which is kind of to something that the other person brought up too, I recently went on a congressional delegation trip to South America. We went to Brazil, Chile, and Colombia. And I was so inspired because I met so many black people there in very high level positions of government. And a lot of them want to come to the United States to help with this. Specifically the Minister of Racial Equity in Brazil, Minister Franco, who is an HBCU grad. So she understands what it, she understands the Black American experience, but she's also an Afro-Latina from Brazil. And I think, engaging with a lot of our international leaders in this can be very helpful. We had a meeting with Vice President Martinez from Colombia, the first Black person to be in a position like that in Colombia. If it wasn't for her, Petro would not be president. And so her experience matters. And so I think engaging internationally on this can be very interesting, but especially in places that are completely forgotten about and have been abused by our country, like Latin America.
Thank you, thank you. I think Maya wants to say something, then we're going to close. Go ahead.
I just want to say all of that is really important, so this is an and. Every single state house in this country, its tri-caucus and progressive caucuses and legislators of the willing, whomever they be, should be introducing a freedom package of legislation. And the freedom package is voting rights. A freedom package is learning all histories, because the attack on history and learning all history in our schools is actually an attack on civil and human rights and an ability to take democracy away from us. Quality of education includes learning multiple languages and culturally public education. And the third is freedom to live. Freedom to live, which is everything from maternal health, access to health care, appropriate and healthy housing. But I mean, exactly. So, but I mean, do you see what I'm saying? Now, it doesn't matter. If we had every single state house doing that, we would be having a different national conversation, and it would also impact a different federal one. That's right. We don't lobby in states as a leadership conference, but I'm just saying that because I think that would be us doing exactly what we need to do for all of our communities.
Thank you. All right, Marco, and then I promise that we're going to end Jose.
The one final piece I'll add, because I think this is really critical, speaking of how we make change, especially when we think about policy, is that we have to understand, and Congressman Frost talked about it, and Maya just alluded to it, this question of representation and who is in the room, I think is also really fundamental, because I have personal insight into this. It's really fundamental to remember that it's not just the legislatures, it's their staff who are there. For every elected official, there's 3, there's 5. In Congress, there's 20 and 30 people who support that elected official. And the more of us, the more diverse those staffs are, the more you'll have, the more you'll avoid those oversights, the more you'll have those lenses that they're talking about to make sure that those bills don't leave out our community or are not hostile to our community. The more people hash out and haggle and debate the fine points of the legislation, the more of our folks who are in there, the more that'll happen. Apologies for the shameless plug, because that's what we do, is build a pipeline of congressional staff. But this is really critical, and not just in federal government, but in states and in local communities, because that's where we can make it's really, really hard to win an election. It's really, really hard to hold an elected official position. You can get a job working in the legislature, you can get a job working in the state house, and that can last beyond one cycle. That can last many, many years, and you can have long-lasting change all the way down to regulation.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you. Clearly, thanks to Jose and Frankie for the foresight for this conversation. Clearly, we could have kept it going, putting together an extraordinary panel, the honor of even moderating it. Continue the conversation both in this room and outside this room. So thank you, Jose and Frankie. I'm going to take a seat.
This is just to say thank you. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you for your commitment to the panels, the previous panels. And this is an ongoing conversation. We wish that we could have more time, but at this point, thank you, thank you, thank you, to be continued.
Thank you, brother.
Oh, my God.
Thank you. That was good.
Thank you so much.